Hi there, my name is Paul Tannehill. In this screencast, I will share how you can collaborate with your friends and your buddies and your associates. In this scenario, we're going to plan an adventure trip that we're going to go on here in a few weeks. My buddies and I like to do a lot of motorcycle riding together, so in this case, I'm going to replicate a trip that we took a couple of years ago. So the idea behind this is that one or two people oftentimes have great ideas on where we might go camp, where we might eat in restaurants, let's say, fuel stops, other interesting places we want to see while we're out and about. Some of us have ideas on the different routes we might want to take through the mountains, through the woods, along the beach, etc., etc. So in one place in an online map, we can collaborate together and bring all those ideas into one area so that eventually we can, right before we launch out on the adventure, we can export the map in a way that everyone has all the data on their GPS devices, whether it's a handheld GPS or a mounted GPS in their vehicle and or a smartphone GPS app. So you don't have to worry about while you're out on the adventure whether you are connected to data or not. If you're in an area where there's no cell phone coverage, of course, a lot of times you'll go in and out and in and out of cell phone coverage on a trip. The way we're going to demonstrate here is you don't have to worry about any of that. You can actually put your phone on airplane mode if you want to and save battery big time while you're out and about. So there's about as many GPS devices and apps, and for that matter, online maps, like we're going to be using some of these tools today. There's about as many variables in place as there are people doing this kind of work, and it isn't really work, it's more like play. Anyway, I'm really well versed in Google Earth Pro. You probably used that or heard of it at least. And Google Maps, of course, everyone uses Google Maps. However, I also use a product called Google My Maps, which I like to think of as a Google Docs version of an online map. So in my Google Drive, I keep my Google Drive pretty organized, and I've got a folder already set up for the My Maps. These are a bunch of the My Maps, Google My Maps that I've used over the years. I'm just going to create a new one. So of course I click on New, and they aren't listed here. You got to go to More down at the bottom, over to My Maps. And I've already started this one, which is this one right here. Now the first thing I usually do with any kind of Google Doc or Google My Map for that matter, I give it a title so it makes sense to me. So there's a title for this one. And I've already cheated a little bit by plopping in some places right here in this places layer. Essentially this first layer comes into place, and you want to give it a title that makes sense to you, just like that. So we're going to be launching out from Lynn Benton College. Going to go out in Central Oregon, take a cool little loop, and then come back to the college. So essentially, at this point, what I've done is I've got 4 places already laid out in here. There's LBCC. We're going to be camping at the Deschutes River Campground on Lake Billy Chinook. I'm going to go through the little bitty town of Ashwood, Oregon, which is in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to go up into Antelope, Oregon, and then make our way back eventually to LBCC. So there are a few different ways to lay out the track or the route on a Google My Map. One of the ways that I usually use, oftentimes use I should say, is oftentimes will click on the Add Directions. And I can just, let's say we're going to go all the way to the campground for the first day. So essentially, if you just start typing that in this spot right here, it's going to find that you've already got this lined up in your places layer. So just click it. So when you do that, this gives you what I think is what Google My Maps considers as being the most straightforward, almost always on pavement route to get there. However, remember, we're going to be camping up here at Lake Billy Chinook. So essentially, Lake Billy Chinook is, oh, actually, look at that. It is giving us pretty much the route that I would want to take. Now, of course, this is Highway 20 if you're not familiar as you get into Sisters down here. This is Highway 20, but right beyond Black Butte, if you take a hard left, some really cool back roads up in here, all gravel and hard packed gravel and stuff. There might be a little detour I would take up here that I know of that's pretty scenic. But anyway, this is a decent way of getting to the Deschutes, what's it called, the Deschutes River Campground. So from there, say that's going to be day 1. We're going to plant ourselves there for the first night. And you'll see up here in the middle of nowhere is Ashwood. So let's say we want another track for the second day where we maybe take a loop from Ashwood through Madras, say for brunch, out to Ashwood, then out and around, and of course Antelope is way up here, and then back down some which way over and back into the campground. This next step through the backcountry might be kind of tricky because Google My Maps is kind of stubborn sometimes and wants to stick to highways and byways. But again, we're going on some dirt and gravel roads, people, so be ready for adventure. So I would say let's try this just this way here. Let's go ahead and add directions from the Deschutes campground again. And let's just say for now we're going to go into Madras, but we're going to have to adjust the route quite a bit to make a really cool looking loop. So as you can see, that looks really boring. However, we need to adjust this out. So I'm just going to go over here as I zoom into Madras, and I believe I'm looking for this road right here. So if you just hover over the track right here, see that dot pop up there? I can just drag it over here and get ridiculous with it. Okay, it's doing kind of what I want. But see, we got to get this all the way into Madras. I'm sorry, into Ashwood. So the route that I know that I remember to take, as we zoom in further, I think it's this right here, right? Yeah, Ashwood Road. Yeah, let's stick with that. So as I get more ridiculous, it starts going up in here. Okay, I can even, this might get kind of dizzying as I'm zooming in and out, of course. And I'm trying to have this not take way too long for you, but I know it goes by that watering hole there, and it gets a little tricky. There we go. There. And this kind of stuff, you can worry about that if you don't want to. You can kind of tighten that up if you want to. Okay, so that is a start, but remember, we're also going into Antelope. Now I happen to know this really nice back road route that may or may not be open this time of the year. It goes right through Washington Family Ranch, which is that old Rajneeshpuram if you watch that movie Wild Wild Country. Let's not worry about that right now, but let's take this route out of Ashwood, see how we do. I think it's going to be along this, and I think we can keep on dragging up, and yeah, there we go. Look at that. If you haven't been on this route, by the way, you're going to want to explore it someday. I'll give you the link to this map if you want. So look, just like that, we've got a plan to get to the campsite on the first night. And this cool route, we did this in the opposite direction a couple of years ago. But then back to the campsite the next night. And then for that matter, if we wanted to take a different way home, we totally could. But let's just, for purposes of this screencast right here, let's take a look closer into Madras, because there's going to be some stops we want to take in Madras before we start getting out there to the east and the northeast through Antelope and Ashwood and stuff. For one thing, we're going to need some fuel, right? So let's click in the places layer over here before we start placing a place, I should say. Usually try to fill up at a non-ethanol place. So essentially, as we go through here, I know of a non-ethanol fuel stop somewhere along the way. Oh, for Pete's sake, it's one of these down here. Let's just pretend it's this. Doesn't matter. We can add that to the map. There's a really good Mexican food restaurant right here. We're going to need that for brunch probably. Add that to the map. Can you see how this is coming together? We oftentimes will go ahead and grab something to go. I thought I saw a Subway. There's a Subway. If I couldn't find Subway by visually, I could type in right here and search for it, by the way. We grab a to-go sandwich right there usually. That to go. And or groceries if we wanted to at Safeway, some fruit, bananas, etc. for the trail also, etc., etc. So you see, these are building up here. And eventually, like I said earlier, you're going to be able to export this entire map so that it comes into your GPS unit, whether again a handheld device or I should say a GPS app. And then what you're going to have out there in the field as all of your friends and buddies have contributed different tracks and ideas for different places of interest to see. There's a good restaurant. I want to stop in Sisters. Oh, let's go to REI over in Bend, etc. It's just going to build from there. So you're going to be able to export this at the tail end of things, right before you launch out. These three dots right here, down to export to KML, KMZ. GPS devices usually don't digest KML or KMZ files. A KMZ is just a zipped KML. If you're using Gaia, which I happen to use my Gaia GPS app, sorry, this is overwhelming. If you use Gaia, this is my preferred GPS smartphone app, it will digest KMLs and KMZs for that matter. If you need it to go on, like I use a Garmin handheld device, I will go ahead and download this as a KML file. And just as a side note here, okay, here it comes. To convert a KML to like a GPX file that a GPS can use, you're going to want to make use of gpsvisualizer.com. I'm not going to go into that in this screencast. I'm just going to say, at the tail end of this process, you and all of your buddies are going to have access to the entire track, all of the waypoints, and again, it's going to be on your devices while you're out and about without having to worry about being in cell phone coverage. And that, in a tiny nutshell, is just barely scratching the surface, the tip of the iceberg on how to collaborate with you and your buddies on a map that you can collaborate on for an adventure. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention it, but of course, to share that with your buddies, of course, you click share. Pretty awesome. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a great time. Stay well, stay safe.